Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Islamic Vibes podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I have with me my co-hosts, Brother Rash, Brother JK, and Brother Ishti. It's been a while, guys, and first of all, assalamu alaikum to you guys, and welcome to the show.
Walaikum
Walaikum
salam.
salam.
I thought you had replaced us. Saw some new brothers on the last podcast.
Yeah. Got some young blood, isn't it?
Yeah. No. Obviously, you can't replace the A team. You know, it was just certain topics that came up, and I thought people might be better suited. But it's good to have you guys back. I know you guys have a busy schedule, and I know in regards to the stuff that Rash and JK are doing in regards to relaunching Voice of the Ummah and the Talking Deen podcast. So maybe towards the end, if you guys want to plug that in, you can do. But yeah, no, other than that, all good. Alhamdulillah. I hope everything's well with you guys. Ishi, not seen you for a while.
Alhamdulillah, all good.
Oh, good, yeah, mashallah. So, guys, as we know, Ramadan is literally around the corner. Are you guys feeling the Ramadan vibe yet, or is it not crept in?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. It has started to. Obviously, we're preparing, making sure we're ready for the iftar, suhoor, and all of that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But still a few days, so may Allah allow us to reach it.
Bro, how do you prepare for making suhoor and iftar, bro? You mean like you get the recipes out and
Out with the shopping, yeah, that's it.
The shopping, yeah. I thought you might need practice on opening your fast, innit?
No, none of that.
None of that, yeah.
Well versed in how to eat, if that's what you're saying.
No, all good. What about Rash issue? You guys feeling the as Ramadan once again crept upon you, or is this something that you've been preparing for the last couple of months, or what do you think?
I think it always creeps on you a little bit. You always wonder how a year's gone past. But yeah, alhamdulillah, the kids are really excited, and we try to create that environment at home for the kids, isn't it? So then they help you as well, because then they're saying, I'm really excited to keep fasts. My second to youngest as well, she's 10 and she wants to do quite a few more this year. So she's really excited. And again, I think that motivates the rest of us.
Yeah. Is she?
I've decided to try and make the most of it. I've got a bit of a plan of action, so I've got a bit of a timetable for personal and just general development in Ramadan, because I think it's important to make the most of it, and the only way you can do it is if you organize yourself.
Yeah, 100%, and I'm a big advocate for that. It's
I've seen your spreadsheets before, yeah.
Yeah, it has to be, because I mean, you get 29 or 30 days. And if you haven't, like as she says, if you haven't planned, then they will fly by, and the month will be gone. So you want to try to squeeze every hasana available, out of this month. But inshallah, I pray that first of all we live long enough to see Ramadan.
Ameen.
And that we can make the most of it.
Ameen.
So Rash, you were going to say something, bro?
No, I was just going to say, are you doing your daily reminders this year?
Yeah, I plan to, but I've not prepared them, and that's what I'm saying to you. It's weird. We know about Ramadan, and it has kind of crept up. So we'll see, inshallah. But yeah, I think it's an important point. Just want to elaborate on Rash, what you said about the kids and stuff. It's really important that they get that special vibe, that Ramadan vibe. I think it's really important that they understand it's more than just refraining from food and stuff, and the barakah and the blessings that are available. And actually even from an historical level, maybe speak about certain events which were significant in the month of Ramadan, whether it's the conquest of Mecca, Battle of Ain Jalut, Battle of Hittin, and all these things. Certainly at a time when a lot of people think the ummah is down and out. I think it's important to have a message that the ummah may be down to what people may think, but it's never out. And we have many examples from our history in the month of Ramadan where the Muslims were able to kind of like regroup and come back stronger. So the kids on that vibe. I mean, my eldest, he was asking me whether we want to do Umrah in Ramadan, because I've been there before. So we'll see how that goes. But actually, that kind of leads on to some of the things we want to discuss today, because for me, I've been to Umrah twice in Ramadan, Alhamdulillah, and it's amazing. The feeling of brotherhood, the feeling of making iftar with the brothers, regardless of where they're from, their social status, all these type of things. It's on the next level. But I went maybe 10 years ago, and as we know, there's been a lot of changes recently in Saudi, and we know that even this Ramadan, that there's even moves to kind of like downsize Islam's role in society even further. And some of the things that have been announced by the Saudi Minister of Islamic Affairs, Dr. Abdul Latif Al-Sheikh. I mean, I don't want to mention all of them, but some of them, like donations for mosques, have been banned. Prohibition of after sunset iftar meals in the mosques. Use of loudspeakers should be limited, except for the main places of worship, like such as Mecca and Medina. And it's the hypocrisy is there, where the adhan, the volume of the adhan is being reduced, but the volume of the raves and these events are going higher. But I mean, there's loads of other things as well, which we can talk about. But I mean, just opening up to you guys now, what do you think Ramadan's going to be like in Saudi, and what do you think about these proposed moves, along with other things like the Muqab and what's happening in Saudi? Rash, I'll start with you, bro. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important that we understand that it's quite a gradual thing, even though in like last couple of years it's probably accelerated, to be fair, with all the raves and all of this crazy stuff. But I was at Hajj in 2018, and I remember we were talking about a Vision 2030 before that, because the reason why I remember it quite vividly is when I was, especially in Medina, I noticed lots of posters of Vision 2030, and we were talking about it, and I didn't realize just how much it was being pushed. Literally every corner you went, there's Vision 2030, Vision 2030. So it was all the way back then. But then obviously the Ibadah side hadn't been affected as much. You could feel the overarching secular side, they're trying to, push other things. But the general doing your Hajj, doing your Umrah, doing Ramadan, those things didn't seem directly affected at the time. Whereas now what you're seeing, and you've highlighted some of them, and I won't give them all because the brothers can add some here. But yeah, I think we need to be very careful, because some people are trying to defend, what you spoke about, some of the bannings of what preventing iftar, for example, within the mosque. Some people are going, oh, no, there's good reasons for that. There's problems, it gets dirty and it's not hygienic. Or some people used to say, oh, they're taking details of the people doing itikaf. Oh, so it's a register. And, people are trying to highlight it as being just admin. It's nothing special. But I would say to anybody who looks at it, look at it all through the vision of that Vision 2030. If you bring the two things together, you immediately see there's an overall reduce the impact of Ramadan amongst the Muslims. That's the overarching. And then you can look at each one of those and see how, even if it doesn't directly right now impact it, collectively over a period of time, they're just trying to, reduce how Muslims will embrace Ramadan in those areas. And then I think, was it in point 10 in that leaflet where it says, don't bring kids? Come on, man. The whole world is realizing that, we need to bring our children to the mosque. Mosques around the world are struggling to get the youth in there. And here's MBS telling people, don't bring your kids to the mosque. It just proves that what the greater agenda is detaching Muslims from Islam, from the mosque, and creating individualism within them. Do it at home, pray at home, leave your kids at home. And if you really, really need to come quickly and do your iftar quickly outside the mosque and leave. And I think that's the overarching message. And hopefully people appreciate that rather than just assume that, oh, yeah, these are just some admin changes.
Yeah, no, some excellent points, bro. I mean, I can elaborate on many things that you said, but I want to give a chance to the other brothers. So yeah, JK Ishi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what Rash is saying, and I think I'll be honest with you. When it first was announced, I was on Twitter just like following the debate, and yeah, I think initially, if you look at the order, it's very subtle. Like the way they've got it across, it's not as blatant as you know. When you look into it a bit more deeply, you can grasp actually this is about reducing the role of Islam. Because they've done it subtly, you know, they will give reasons why. So when they talk about the iftar only being in the courtyard, they're trying to, yeah, like Marash said, oh, you know, it will reduce litter in the masjid, or it will reduce litter in the areas of salah and stuff like that. But I think the key point Rash made it is you need to look at it from the lens of Vision 2030, and really, you know, if you think about Ramadan and the vibe that Ramadan, what we spoke about at the start, the vibe that Ramadan gives, it is meant to be a little, you know, you were meant to really maximize the barakah of Ramadan. So why should we limit the iftar? Why should we limit the people that can go to iftikaf? Why should we limit children going to Ramadan? So whilst you might be able to find some willy-nilly reason of why it might have some benefits in doing this, the point is, why should we limit Ramadan? We should be shouting about it. We should be, you know, the adhan being loud in Ramadan when people are awake most of the time because they're doing ibadah. What's the problem with that? There is no problem. I think everyone who wants to defend that Saudi state, they will find an excuse, right? They will find an excuse. But the real question will be, how would the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what would he do in this situation? When you think about the role of the masjid in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, it was a communal place. It was a place that was there for the needy, there for children. It was there for companions to gather and strategize, and it played such a wider role than what the Saudi state is trying to do. And as Rash said, they're trying to basically secularize the masjid and secularize the population into reducing Islam to an individual act. Obviously, they can't remove Islam altogether and say no Ramadan this year, but they're slowly reducing Ramadan, right? There was another one in the list of things around the donations. So we know the hadith around feeding a fasting person, right? There's a benefit. It's as though you are fasting if you're feeding a fasting person. So everyone wants to donate in Ramadan. So why would you limit this? Why would you say, no, you can't do this? You're essentially limiting ibadah. So that's why we just need to step back. And I'll be honest, my brother sent it to me and I was like, are we stretching this a bit? Like, I genuinely, are we stretching? Like, is this, because there's so much more Vision 2030 we can talk about. Obviously, I'm Votron, so we want to get stuff out, get messages out, right? So I was like, is this really as bad as it seems? Let's really question it. But no, I think, you know, and we had a bit of a discussion. We said, actually, this is really bad. They're just being very sly about it. And if you dig deeper, you can see the harmful nature of some of these actions and some of these orders.
Yeah, no, exactly. Ishi, you want to add anything on that one, bro?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, right, the spirit of Ramadan, you know, at the end of the day, if you look at Ramadan as just purely actions, it's just you're not eating that much in the day, you're not eating anything in the day, you're not drinking, and then you're opening it. But the actual spirit and where it comes alive is when you see the brothers, you see all the Muslims coming in, eating together, going straight to prayer after Tarawih. It's actually destroying the spirit of, you know, the communal spirit. That's what it's really aimed at. If you look at each of the points individually, I think there's some, you can reason behind them, right? And they're all sort of logical. But the spirit of Ramadan is that togetherness, being together, discussing, seeing how you're getting through it, working out what's happening in the world, and you actually feel like part of a genuine community. And where this doesn't happen on a daily basis, I think if you start losing that aspect of it, then Ramadan is just a generic action. I mean, there was one thing that really surprised me, but the children one was really surprising. But something that I really look forward to is the qunut, you know, the dua that they make. And I really feel like, you know, when you hear all these countries and you feel you're part of a community and you're making dua, and I can imagine, you know, like someone in a difficult situation, you're making dua, you get emotional and you think, you know, your connectedness. And they even said to control your intonation, you know, where you increase your pitch. So it brings about emotion. Mm-hmm. It's actually to destroy that sort of spirit. And that's what I think they're really, really going for. And I think a point I was mentioning, if you look at this on its own, you might just think, oh, it's about noise, etc. But if you look at the actions after Vision 2030, you can see it's a diminishing of Islam and the spirit of Islam. And it is the opening of liberalism. So as Islam diminishes, liberalism takes over, and that's what's happening in front of our eyes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, another point linked to the these new rules changes. I mean, to be honest with you, when I first saw the changes, I was like, I need to verify this. Bringing no children to the mosque, come on, that can't be one, right? It was shocking. But what people must understand is this. Rash makes a fantastic point. You can't look at these in isolation of Vision 2030, but also you got to look at it from the aspect of a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, maybe, who are saying this, right? Either they Saudi supporters, i.e. they from within Saudi and they support the regime. But most of these people, other than them, are going to be like abroad. So when they make the exception that, yeah, there's these changes, but not in Mecca and Medina, people think, well, listen, that's fine. It's not in Mecca and Medina. But people who go to Umrah and come back in Ramadan, you're there for how long? 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if max, right? You're not part of that society. What we're saying, this change is to change the society for the people living there. And if you go back and I encourage people to do this, go and look at the Greater Middle East Initiative map that was drawn by the Americans in 2014. And it was actually published. This is their arrogance, right? And what they showed Saudi, where the Hijaz area, where Mecca and Medina was like, in a way, you have the Vatican. It was like the religious place, right? Yeah. It was separate. And then the rest of Saudi was just like another nation state, a secular society, right? So just think about it now. When you understand that, you can see why, yeah, they're not going to change it in Mecca and Medina because that would be too problematic. But for all the other people who live there, the millions of people who live there, all these changes are in their local mosques, right? So through this, what they're trying to do is they're trying to downsize the role of Islam for the people living there, not so much for people who go there to visit. It's for the people living there. And at the same time, whilst they're doing this, as Ishi said, they're promoting liberalism, but also what they're promoting is the aspect of nationalism. Okay, so what we're seeing is there's a guy called Bruno Schmidt-Fjordhead, if that's how you pronounce his name, right? He's a political analyst at the University of Cambridge. And what he said was that in the Saudi public sphere, religion is increasingly replaced by culture. So when you see this new muqab that they've announced, it's linked to the Saudi culture rather than Islam. So it's what analysts are saying, it's a shift from the religious aspect of Mecca or the image of Saudi to a secular one. Also, there were other things that were done before. So, for example, when they changed the day of what do they call it? They called it the National Day, the country's National Day.
Saudi, yeah.
They changed it from 1744 to 1727 because 1744 is the link between the Saudis and Abdul Wahab, i.e. that religious link. They want to link it back to when, the Saudis, as in the tribe, they set their first emirate. They said, you understand? So what they're trying to do is they're making the changes. So for people who are saying, well, look, it's not the end of the world. For you sitting outside of Saudi, it's easy saying that because those things don't impact you. But imagine now, people living in Pakistan, now the government of Pakistan said, okay, now we're going to reduce the noise or the sound of the adhan. You can't bring your kids to the mosque. You can't make iftar there. Then people would start feeling it. Yeah. But they're not feeling it because you're looking at it as a foreigner in a way.
Yeah, there's another aspect to that as well, is the language. So I think they're clever as well. They realize that internally they can clamp down hard. The people who understand Arabic, they understood this message more because some of the brothers that, kind of exposed it more, obviously spoke Arabic. So they said, look, there's certain words in the Arabic version that are clear cut and blatant, and someone would straight away realize this is there's an agenda behind this. But when they themselves translated it to English, then they made it more subtle because they recognize there can be a backlash from outside because there's an internal backlash. But if the backlash from outside is there as well, then there's pressure on them. Like last time when they tried to...
Quick point.
Yeah.
And this was happening. The internal backlash, they suppress.
Exactly.
They can't suppress the external one because they haven't got control over it.
And that's my point. That's why they did that in that way that, okay, they can't completely hide it because it's in the public domain. But what they can at least do is when they translate it to English or when the English translation is out there, let's make it a little bit more subtle so the backlash isn't as big. Which is why equally when they tried to put some of those things onto Mecca and Medina, previously, a couple of years ago, there was a backlash. So some of it is about testing the grounds. If you test the grounds with these things, and if you do things gradually over the years and years, then what happens is naturally people who are opposing it, you know, sometimes they might lose the zeal or the willpower to keep opposing it year after year after year. And it's a long game for them. It's a long game, even though, like I said at the beginning, I think they've accelerated some things with all the stuff that's happening in Riyadh around the entertainment side. Even anybody who thought they were going to do it, you know, as blatantly wouldn't have probably guessed they would have gone to the length that, or to the extreme that they have done, to be fair.
And this is also just a quick point, and just to throw it in there as well, linked to what Ishi's saying as well, in the fact that yes, you might argue that they are going to replace these religious ideas with liberal ones. However, what you're seeing is that what's happening there is not just enforced on the people. This is being imported from the West. The instructions are coming from the West. And I'll tell you why. Because if the West was saying, if America was saying, we want it to be a truly free liberal society, right? Then you wouldn't be depicting people who criticize these changes as traitors of the nation, right? You would think that there's that room for criticism. But what they're doing is they're forcing it. They're trying to show that they made some changes about the women and the raves and stuff like that. But at the same time, they can't be fully open because people would come out and say, we don't accept this. They obviously can't allow that. The image looks like people are loving this. There is a segment of the society that are. It's not everyone. So you can see where this is being forced. And when we're saying when we're talking about the pace of the changes, they are unnatural. They are unnatural. So you can see where it's not like I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Even the birth of secularism and the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, that this happened over I think centuries. The whole process. Yeah. What you're talking about here is going from the home of Islam, apparently, to home of raves in a couple of years. That's not natural. It's being forced, but people are not allowed to, people are not given those liberties to speak out against it, to actually say, we don't accept this. Yeah? Sorry, Jakey, I think you wanted to say something.
No, I agree with that. I think that's the point I was going to make, that it will be subtle and it will be transitional rather than it just being blatant, even though there are elements that are blatant. I think when I've been in some discussions, it's like, don't look at it from this very, like, you know, some of it's symbolic. So it's not like blatant fatwa style, oh, is it haram or halal? Halal or haram? Obviously, look at things like that. That's the right way to look at things, but like read the room, right? Read the music, like listen to the music, or what they said, read the room. Like, which direction is it going in? So when we say Al-Muqab is like becoming a center place for going to be, and they called it themselves, this is going to be the center of entertainment. No one is saying it's going to replace in the Kaaba. Obviously, they're not replacing the Kaaba. No one's saying that, but there's a shift away from religious, kind of like I said, the religious identity, Islamic identity, to the secular identity, this identity that we want to attract more tourists. We want to become more like the West. There definitely is. How can anyone deny that? And this argument that, oh, but it's happening in Riyadh. It's happening in Riyadh, so don't worry. But it's happening in Jeddah. Don't worry about those lands. It's not happening in Al-Haram Sharif, right? It's happening in those lands. But who's making these things happen? It's the people that still claim to be custodians of the Haram Sharif, and you know, they're still meant to be the custodians. It's still in that land and the surrounding areas. The people are still the ones that go to Mecca and Medina, and on the surrounding areas. So you can't detach. It's not that simple just to detach the two. It's definitely targeting the surrounding regions because they can't do it directly in these places. And the other thing that's really important to recognize is that, you know, the birth of Saudi, you know, the reason Saudi was based on an Islamic kind of angle and the Wahhabi movement and Abdul Wahhab and all of that, it was because they were required to do that. They were required to give it some sort of Islamic background so that they could justify their rebellion against the Uthmani state.
One second at that point. I want to make this point, but now I have to make this point. These people, from their point of view, because, you know, like they're saying move away from the religious identity to a Saudi cultural identity. The Saudis, even at that time, they were Islamic.
Yeah.
They knew nothing other than Islam. They weren't having raves, like camel raves in the right? So that's why why I'm bringing that up now is, like you mentioned, like today you have the secularists, open secularists like in Turkey who play the Islamic card.
Yeah.
However, I would, if you're I would kind of disagree to say that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you think about who did the Saudi work with to rebel against the British? Yes. I'm not saying they're not like, yes, of course they knew Islam, but who did they work with? They worked with the West to rebel against the Uthmani, and the West and the British aided this on the basis of Islam to say, look, you know, cause a rift between you and the Turks so that you can generate this another kind of state and go against. Yes, they went against Sharif of Mecca and all of that, and we don't need to go into the history lesson, but what I'm trying to say is the birth of Saudi there was a requirement for it to be Islamic because that's how they came about, right?
100%.
Now they recognize that, and Vision 2030 is all about this. They recognize that there needs to be a shift away from it. The way they used Islam to come to power and build their state is no longer needed, right? So they're ready to abandon Islam and then, you know, move towards secularism and liberalism under the guise of economic prosperity, you know, changing our portfolio because actually we're not getting enough economy and income from the Hajj, even though they're charging loads, to be fair. So I'm not sure where that's come from. But oil revenue as well, obviously, they're talking about the shift away from oil revenue to tourism. So they will always badger it under this kind of reasoning. And it's very easy for those who defend it to come up with all of this. But my point really is that, look, read the room. The direction they're going in is of liberalism. It's towards liberalism. It's towards westernization of that region.
Yeah. I mean, you had the one of the scholars who fled Saudi, didn't he?
Something, isn't it?
Yeah, to talk about you know, and you mentioned, you know, that he totally disagrees, and had he stayed, he would have been locked up like all the other scholars. And but if you go on the internet and you go on to like YouTube, TikTok, you'll find many people, you know, apparently, I mean, there may be scholars or just religious people, imams and stuff, who were really rebuking this guy for what he did. So what you're seeing is you're still getting people to who are making excuses for these regimes, whether it's under the guise of he should not have openly said this about the rulers, and then use hadith in a different context just to, you know, pass that through. You do get some people who are still making excuses when I think either they have an agenda or they haven't read the room, as what JK has been said. You can't look at these things in isolation. Like us, you know, I recommended people look at the Greater Middle East Initiative that was announced. Look at the 2014 map that was drawn and actually was made publicly available, where what you're seeing happening in Saudi now is bang on depicted, described in that map. So I guess
even the Khashoggi, you know, the killing of Khashoggi, or the best way to say it, even that highlights that, you know, those people who previously one might have gone, oh, if I go into a safe space and then speak out against the regime, then I can get the right message out. But since that happened, have you seen anybody else really, maybe since this guy who came out and said a few things recently? Most people, even if they leave the country, they're fearful of speaking out against the regime because you're not safe anywhere. And what repercussion has there been on Saudi for doing that?
Immunity.
I think this is these are the challenges, and one thing I would say to anyone from who lives in I don't even like calling it Saudi Arabia, but who lives in Saudi Arabia, that right now you might appreciate these changes, you might have some sort of nationalistic tendency that's grown recently, but remember this: if you allow these changes to go through, and here I'm not specifically talking about the people who disagree but can't speak out. They are in their own situation, and I'm not going to sit here and say they need to do that, right? But I'm talking about the people who don't see it too much of an issue and can make excuses for their leaders to do these things. That if you are okay with this, or if you don't see it as a problem, or if you support this, that when the generations that are going to come, if the plan goes ahead and the decadency and where Saudi is going, where they're taking Saudi, those misled generations that are going to come in the future, that's going to be on your shoulders. That's going to be on your neck. That responsibility is for the people there now, because there's a large part of that land who, at the moment, they want to speak out, they can't. However, they will pass away and they will be replaced by people who actually don't see this as a problem. And what do you think is going to be the next? And what do you think is going to be next? And people need to understand that, we're not just highlighting Saudi. The problem here is that anywhere in the Muslim lands, we don't want this type of stuff. Saudi has a special place, not just because of the fact that it has the haram, also because the way it's seen is that if Saudi does something, like especially from an Islamic point of view, then the rest people will follow. The rest of the region will follow suit, because, well, it's happening in Saudi Arabia, must be okay. And that's the danger. And that's the challenges that I think that the Muslims are going to experience this Ramadan and future Ramadans in Saudi. But also, there's challenges elsewhere. I mean, just think about Palestine. I mean, we saw what happened last Ramadan, you may recall, and without a shadow of doubt, even if this far right government wasn't in place, there was going to be a lot of issues for the Muslims there. But now, with people like Ben Gvir stating the fact that they're going to reverse the decision of demolishing the houses through Ramadan just because it's Ramadan. He doesn't care. He says, well, we're not going to allow the people to do away with the law just because it's Ramadan. Okay, what's going to happen with that? That's going to cause aggro. Yeah, there's other talks about closing the masjid for a certain amount, about 10 days or something. I couldn't find too much on it, but there are rumors. But we know that a lot's going to happen there in Ramadan, and actually we know that a lot's happening at the moment as well. I mean, with all the reforms, the legislative reforms that have been going on. What are your thoughts about what's kicking off in Palestine in general, but also, what do you think Ramadan's going to be like in Palestine this year?
I think we're almost at like a boiling point. And there's some people saying there might be another intifada. And I think the reason for it, a lot of events are happening at the same time. Obviously, you've got the judicial reforms by Netanyahu. Basically, like in the UK, you have the House of Parliament that passed draft up an amendment to the law, and it goes to the House of Lords and they correct it. Whereas in Israel, they have the Knesset, and then they have the Supreme Court that reviews the law and sees if it's applicable. What Netanyahu wants to do is scrap that, and if the Knesset, which is their parliament, comes up with something, it goes through. And the advantage for him is he's in a bit of a pickle with all the fraud and embezzlement, or whatever you want to call it. But also, a lot of these settler issues are stopped for them because they have certain rules, and they have to adhere to certain situations. And if the Knesset was to pass it, these settler situations would be resolved. The laws there done, you can settle. And I think particularly with this far-right government, with people like Ben Gvir who want to increase settlement, he wants to increase settler privilege. He actually wants to take people Palestinians out of Palestine. He wants them out. He wants prisoners to not have bad food. He is almost genocidal. That's how bad he is. We're talking that sort of serious, and that's the sort of tension. And I think even reading about this a little, you see that, you know, there's some activism in places like Nablus and Jenin, and they're calling them like the Lions Brigade and all this kind of stuff. But all it is a few people throwing stones and guns, whereas this is a full-blown army in tight spaces with really powerful weapons and shooting them. It's absolutely crazy. And I think it is getting to a boiling point. And this Ramadan really will be a show of power by Israel.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, just to add to what she's saying, I think every Ramadan they stoke the flames there, because they know that it has the biggest reaction of the Muslims, because generally Muslims obviously are more, there's more people that go to the Al-Aqsa and the compound, and there more people about, really. So there's easier ways, that's the best opportunity for them to really cause a reaction, not only amongst the people there, but also why, you know, across the Ummah wide, because everyone is obviously making dua for Palestine, and there's that a greater attachment in Ramadan than other months. So Israel play on this, and that's because they, as Ishi was referred to, they're very divided, right? Israel is not a unified nation. They're very divided. A lot of more left-leaning centrist kind of Zionist Israelis, or whatever you want to call them, they're actually against what Netanyahu is doing with the judicial reforms. And that's not because they want something different. It's not that like they have sympathy for the Palestinians. That's not the case. The reason they are against it is that they genuinely believe Israel should be the largest, whatever they call it, largest democracy in the Middle East.
The only democracy in the Middle East.
Only democracy in the Middle East, yeah. So they call it that. They label it this. So they have some pride in trying to make Israel that. So obviously what these judicial reforms would be fully anti-democratic from their perspective. So a lot of the left-leaning people in that nation, they've been protesting against this, as well as a lot that are against Netanyahu for what he's done, right, and some of the crimes he's committed. So you see that their nation is divided, very divided, right? They don't agree on many things, but one thing they can agree on is kind of their attack on the Palestinians, and they can agree on what they're doing, settlership around West Bank and Gaza, and basically taking more and more of Palestine. They can all agree on that. How they do it is probably what they disagree on to an extent, because they want it to be all legal and all of that. Some of them, right? Whilst others are a bit more like just be brutal and just do it up front. Like obviously you mentioned Ben Gvir, but also Bezalel Smotrich. What's his role? But he's quite senior in the.
He's a minister, man. Quite a senior minister.
Minister, yeah. I forgot his title, but he actually called for that region, Huwarra. He was saying the people shouldn't be burning and setting this ablaze. The Israeli government should do it, right? He's saying that this place should be wiped out. He used this language in an interview, right? And he was called out for it, but he pushed this, right? So he's very, very far right, and Ben Gvir, they're very far right. Their organization and the government now is probably the most far right it's ever been, because Netanyahu needed this in terms of him coming to power, even though he's not as much as those two. So the key point, as Ishti was saying, I think Ramadan is going to be very, you know, inshallah, I will pray that it's not that bad, but it feels like we're moving towards it being quite a bad Ramadan for the Palestinians.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, because brothers have mentioned it already, the only thing to add is that what JK is saying about, you know, this is a way of uniting them. And I think the reason why it works so well is because they've done a good job from the point of view of indoctrinating their population to recognize a threat from the people in Gaza, a threat from Iran, and I know we'll have a chat about that in a second as well. They've managed to indoctrinate their populations and their populace to see that as this massive threat to them. So that even the liberals, even those people who go, oh, the Palestinians deserve their rights, they've been indoctrinated to the extent that they're going, you know what, yeah, whilst they might deserve their rights, my life is more important than their life, so I will still back it. So then when Ben Gvir comes out with this kind of rhetoric, and it's more than rhetoric to be fair, because he will go through with it given the opportunity. When he comes out with that, he then gets a degree of support, and therefore those people that would normally even be anti-right wing or be more centrist or left, they have to support it because they're supporting it on the basis of what they think is a threat to their lives, and that's how they keep them united. And even then, the West, in that the US and stuff, are showing some of these protests now in the country. They're showing those protests because it fits their agenda. If those protests didn't fit their agenda, they'd have just gone, oh, we won't even need to show it. Like some of the stuff that's happening in, say, France and stuff. A lot of the protests happening in France are not even on mainstream media because if it doesn't fit their agenda. Whereas right now, US don't want this right-wing government to fulfill some of the promises that they're saying. It doesn't fit what their vision for the region is, and therefore it can now go, okay, look at these protests, look at the people, they don't want this. And it's just utilizing that. And Ben Gvir and the right-wing side of the government, what they're doing to counter that is go, look, this is how we're going to get people on our side. And it's just all it's going to lead to is, unfortunately, Muslims are going to lose their lives, and it's going to happen in the month of Ramadan.
Yeah, I think we need to think about when we're talking about Ben Gvir and the Stromich geezer, what we see is the fact that these guys are not isolated from the masses. These guys won't. They've got a lot of following, so they actually. The more dangerous thing is these guys are not individuals. They actually reflect the sentiments for quite a large population within the people there, right? And like one of your brothers said, Netanyahu needed these guys to come into power, right? And to do this now, he has to give them some sort of some sort of freedom to do some of the things that they promised the people who vote for them, right? The election base. But at the same time, I think what's really important is that Netanyahu doesn't want to go to jail, right? So these judicial reforms are being pushed, because it will save him, but also it appeals to people like Ben Gvir, because as Ishi pointed out, is, like there's certain areas where there's a dispute where it's gone to the Supreme Court, can these settlers live here, or is this Palestinian land, even though that's all bogus anyway. But that wouldn't be even the case anymore. It'd be a case of this is a settlement. That's fine. The people there be evicted, and you'll build a new settlement, right? That appeals also to these extremists. But as you mentioned, Rash, the Americans, who people shouldn't get it mixed up. They're not friends of Muslims or Islam. They have their own agenda, and they see that as being a two-state solution, which they're still pushing for that region, normalization and all of these things. And this government and this policies is choosing to enforce actually go against that foreign policy of America at this moment in time, right? So what we're seeing is that America is putting pressure now on these governments. So we saw that the Israeli delegates, I think they were expelled from the African summit. We saw that the UAE refused to take delivery of the Israeli surface-to-air missiles. People within US, like politicians and stuff like that, they'd be more critical of people like Netanyahu than they have in the past. And the one you mentioned, which was an interesting one, is the Iran and Saudi talks. Oh. Now, I think there's many points in regards to we can take from that, and I think it's worth discussing because it was a bit of a bombshell, and for the ordinary person who probably isn't really too up to date with politics, it's like, really, how did that just happen out of the blue? But the reality is again, this is applying pressure. Again, the Iranians are being used like they have been in the past to entrench this Sunni and Shia divide. Now they're being used again to apply pressure onto this government, this far-right government, to say, get back to the plan. Don't get ahead of yourselves. You may think that you control things, but you don't. Any thoughts on that?
I'm glad you did the topics in that order, because now it's easy just to point back, isn't it? Because now that we just spoke about what's happening in Israel, it links directly to obviously these talks as well, because this is now, people hopefully should see that this is also a stick to beat Israel with, because as soon as there's reparations between Saudi and Iran, like there has been now, and again, these talks have been going for a reasonable number of years. Someone was even, I read somewhere, was even as far back as before Soleimani was killed, there was talks that he was involved in some of these discussions as well. That's the first I'd heard of it, to be fair, but apparently he started off some of these talks. A bit surprising. But at the same time, yeah, so this is, firstly, you can see that this isn't just an independent China coming along and going, let's get Iran and Saudi together after all of these years, because that's very useful to us. This is also America going, you know what, if we let this happen, then we can use this as a stick to beat Israel and make sure they stay in line with what we want for the region. You know, they want the status quo. They want a situation where they recognize there's a need for, you know, their bastard child to be in the middle of the lands and causing dispute amongst the Muslims. But equally, they don't want to get it so extreme so that it gets to this level where the Muslims unite because of them. You know, it's like playing a balancing act. What you're trying to do is make sure they stay there so it creates conflict and a rift. And to be fair, even a rift between Saudi and Iran. But then don't let them get so extreme that all the Muslim lands unite and go, we can't have these guys here anymore. So it's that balancing act. And part of that is to utilize Iran and create, you know, allow this kind of relationship now with Saudi. The thing is, though, the way I see it, and just one other point, is that Saudi are already in the pockets of the Americans. They're the ones we just, again, the order of the topics are intentional, I'm sure, from yourself, Maj, in that we've seen that the Saudis are promoting Vision 2030, liberalism, de-Islamization. Then how more convenient is now get the Saudis more in line with Iran, and then that facilitates. So yes, some people might go, oh, look, Muslim nations uniting, that's a good thing. Oman have come out and gone, this is a good thing. Other countries will come out and go, look, how good, you know, finally Muslims are, I think even Turkey came out and said, this is a good thing. But it's only a good thing if these Muslim nations are serving Islam. When they're not serving Islam, how is it a good thing? And again, you can see the different powers being played out against each other. And there's an argument to discuss the China thing as well, but I'll let the other brothers add something first, because then I think we should mention China as well.
Yeah, exactly. Any thoughts, guys?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Rash is saying, that it'll be naive to think that this agreement between Iran and Saudi is done independently of the US. I mean, it's not about what we know. There's enough evidence out there to know that both Saudi and Iran are under the orbit of America. They will do things.
What did Trump say a few years back? Saudi wouldn't last 2 weeks without them.
Exactly. They weren't. And we know that, right? And not just because of what they're doing in terms of Vision 2030. They've always been used, and Iran has always been used as a bogeyman for the region, as well as putting pressure on Israel. So that's exactly why they allowed this, the US. In fact, Biden knew about these talks. So there's a statement of him saying he knew about them. So there's this claim that it was done independently only because China, obviously it was done via China. That's incorrect to think that, and that would be total naivety to think that it's just happening independently. Saudi are getting a bit more independent. The reality is, as Rash said, the US have allowed this to happen so that they can pressurize Israel back into line, because they're not happy with the direction that it's moving in. It doesn't fall into their agenda of normalization. It doesn't fall under the agenda of the two-state solution. So what better to unite Iran with Saudi and cause a little bit more tension and heat on Israel and bring them back into line. That's exactly why they've done it. And obviously from a China perspective, look, China, obviously there is definitely a disagreement between China and the US, definitely. The US do see them as a challenge. I wouldn't say rival. They see them as a challenge from an economic perspective mainly. So they will do their best to reduce China's influence. But we should recognize, what is China doing? China isn't there to take over the world. They don't have global ambitions from a political sense. They've got economic ambitions, right? So they will look for their own economic interest, do deals that will support them from an economic perspective. Even this deal they did with Iran, that's also an economic angle in the sense that Iran are now importing quite a few bits from China because of some of the sanctions the US have put on them. So Iran themselves had to kind of shift in a certain direction that China wanted them to, so that basically China will be happy with them and they can carry on with it. So it all links together, but it would be total naivety to think that it's done independently of the US. I mean, even look at their reactions. The US haven't come out and done anything about this. They're happy with this. They're okay with this because it achieves their agenda. Once anyone does anything that falls outside of the agenda of the US, you will know. You will know that someone's done that. Like Russia. What Russia have done is totally outside the agenda of the US, right? And that's why they're getting all of that. So we'll know they're the only superpower in the world. To think that they just allow something like this to happen and no repercussions, you know, come on, that's ridiculous. And we need to be careful that we just celebrate things like this without having a bit more depth and foresight into why things are happening.
Exactly. I mean, just the element of Saudi being independent is comical. You know, that they would do this with the Chinese without America, you know, and with it going against what America wants. You know,
there are deluded people that still come out. You hear them now and again going, "Oh yeah, Saudi, you know, America are there. You know, they control America." It makes you, yeah. What world are they living in?
They are painting that picture, aren't they? They're saying, you know, after the murder of or assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a journalist at the Washington Post, I think. There was obviously issues. Biden wasn't happy with that. He even withdrew their support in Yemen, unless it was for defense purposes. So they are making out there is a slight diminishing in that relationship. But the fact is, you only know that once Saudi step out of line and go against their plan. When you actually think what America's involved in, is
just on that point though, Ishti, that the Jamal Khashoggi point though, that Biden gave MBS diplomatic immunity for what he did. They basically got pardoned. So if it genuinely was, because they can use that as a stick, right? They can use that against MBS and say, actually, we're going to call you to action. They're doing it against Trump or all this other stuff because he went against the system. So they can use it. The deep state can do enough to and the fact that they gave him immunity just shows that, you know, they're not totally displeased with what he's doing. But sorry, carry on. But I just thought I'd make that point whilst you made it.
No, that's absolutely no, exactly love that. I think the other point is, you know, if you think about it, if China has a better relationship with Iran, then effectively, if they start importing energy from Iran rather than Russia, then actually it diminishes one of the opponents of the US. So actually it works out for the US if they're less reliant and dependent on Russia. So I think it's really, really important. I think you really made a good point about the Israel as well, because yes, they are very, very close allies. I think they sometimes call it the most important ally in that region, but sometimes their interests aren't aligned. Israel wants as much land as possible. It wants, I think about it, right? Saudi might go onto Abraham Accords. They're getting better relations with all the Arab nations, right? So they can go wild. They've got the US support. They've got Arabs staying silent. Nobody's saying anything. So why not go crazy? Now's the time to party, right? But it doesn't align with Americans' view. They want a two-state solution. So there is a bit of mishandling. So when I was young, the horror movie at the time was the Candyman, not the Boogeyman. So why not bring out Candyman and scare the children to death, right? But that's how it is, isn't it? That's what they're doing, essentially. So...
There's a banging point, especially the Russia point. Yeah, people need to recognize that, because that's what you're getting. Even American news stations coming out going, "Oh, America really worried about this deal" and stuff like that. But you know, the Americans themselves aren't coming out and saying that. And the reason why they're not, they might have some concern. You know, again, they don't want to give China too much influence, but they recognize that this causes China to move away from Russia a little bit, you know, and lose that dependency. And they don't want a China-Russia alliance either. So, you know, it's clear, like JK saying, you can tell when the way, you know, the nations react to these kind of events and their language, what they want and what they don't want.
Exactly. So really fantastic points, guys. Really fantastic points. I think also it's kind of linked to this, but I want to bring you up anyway before we end the podcast. I think it's worth mentioning that I think it's tomorrow, 20 years since the invasion of Iraq. And I think this should be maybe this should be a wake up call to the other the Muslims in the area, in the region, that in reality you may think that the US are your allies, but this is what they can do to Muslims. And I was just watching some interviews of people speaking about the anniversary, the 20th anniversary, and a lot there was a theme that people were saying that it wasn't perfect before, but it was not like this. And some people were saying that they kind of like maybe fell for the promises of a better life and more prosperity and democracy and stuff like this. But what they've seen has been nothing as what they expected. And maybe it's, well, you know what, and think about the timing as well, man. The 20th anniversary tomorrow. Only recently there's been calls for the ICC. ICC?
ICC,
yeah, not the International Cricket Council. It's the International Criminal Court, isn't it? Yeah.
Court,
Yeah.
Put out a warrant, if you want to call it that, for Vladimir Putin.
But did you also hear what the ICC did about basically giving immunity to America for what they did in Afghanistan? So basically, they said that they won't be. It's a Muslim guy as well, the head of the ICC.
Some Khan, a guy, something Khan, wasn't it?
Yeah. But he was saying that basically they won't be investigating the crimes committed by. He didn't say that crimes, but the actions committed by America. Their focus is more on what Daesh did and what Taliban did. So that just shows. And there's actually someone sent me some clause of the ICC. America are able to basically go against the ICC, take out anyone that's accused under the court. They can basically support them, protect them, take them out of that scenario.
Well, they don't recognize the ICC, and neither Russia. Yeah, but moving away from ICC for a second, I just thought just bring that up because of the 20th anniversary. I mean, what are your thoughts on the 20th anniversary, man? It's been 20 years. I remember sitting up at night that day when they called it the shock and awe. And I don't know if you guys were watching it, and because they televised it. I think this was the first war that they televised like a documentary in real time, right? And you saw the missiles strike Baghdad, and I can remember like that, like as if that was yesterday.
Yeah. It's like 9/11, isn't it? It's one of those events you remember. You vividly. You remember vividly where you were when it was said. The bit that I remember most is the interview by Bush, where he's like, either you're with them,
either you're with us,
or you're against with the terrorists, basically. And that was basically pitting the Muslims away, the West in one camp and the Muslims in another camp. Obviously, they used the word terrorism. But for me, I think the key lessons, and I might write a blog on this actually, but key lessons for me really is that, the West, they used lies and deception in order to carry out their plans, right? So that when it comes to what did Saddam have anything to do with 9/11? There's no link whatsoever, nothing, right? But they invaded Iraq. They claimed that he had WMD. There was no claim, that was never found. In the same time, similar time, I think it's anniversary as well, about Libya. I forgot what's called, Operation something. They claimed that Gaddafi was attacking his people and killing his people. It was unsubstantiated. Arab Spring. There's loads of these kind of what do you call it? Pretexts. These pretexts for invading our lands, in order to basically give justification to their population, give justification to their government that they need to invade. And Blair was involved, obviously Bush was involved, other nations were involved as well. So for me, the key lesson is deception and lies is part of their makeup. The other bit is they call us criminals. They claim that they're going in these lands to remove the criminals, remove Saddam for what he did, But in the end, who are the criminals? They're the ones that killed thousands, millions in these lands. They're the ones that have spent, whatever, X million on these invasions. They've
Trillions,
displaced
man.
Trillions, man.
yeah?
Trillions.
37 million people have been displaced due to their war on terror, right? War on Islam. So who are the real terrorists, right? So that's another thing. I'm sure there's more, but for me, this is just an event that really highlights the criminality of the West. And another thing, the fact that there was no accountability. Forget Shilkot inquiry. What happened? Blair, Bush, all of these people, Rumsfeld obviously died. All of these people, they got away with it.
Colin Powell in as well.
Right? They're accusing Putin and stuff, and they want to arrest Putin. But what happened to these criminals? Nothing.
Yeah, and that's the reality of it, man. That's the reality of it, and I think you kind of like summarized that really well, to be honest with you. And it's just something. Yes, Ishi.
The thing is, it was a terrible tragedy. But the point that you mentioned about these pretexts, Israel starts misbehaving. All of a sudden, we hear about 83%, 84%, nearly weapons grade uranium in Iran. These pretexts are still happening. And this is the thing, we need to realize that information is released for people to be convinced of what their plans. And this keeps happening. And this is what we have to protect ourselves against. So it is a 20-year-old issue, and we need to remember it, and it's still a bad situation, but they are still using the same techniques, and they are still not accountable. And I think that's an absolute banging point.
Yeah. I think for Muslims, it's especially those who are living in the West, those who maybe feel some sort of loyalty or something to their host nation, shall I say? I mean, our link is to the Ummah. We are one Ummah. Doesn't matter geographically where you are. What we see here is, as JK said, under false pretext, a nation was invaded, people were invaded, they were terrorized through shock and awe, 37 million displaced, and all of these things happen under a lie pretext. Okay, no problem. The people that were lying were clever, they were conniving. But you know what? People realized they were lying. Okay, so what happened to them? Well, they received knighthood.
They've got institutions that continue to decide foreign policy.
And that's what we need to really, as Muslims, think about. It's not like these guys did this and then they were held to account for doing this. That's the difference between how they view Muslims and how they view other people like Ukrainians. I mean, John Barnes has been on fire recently. Yeah. Yes. And the points he makes, they're valid. The fact that, people value, and this is something which is, I'm talking about the population, even though normal people, they're not bad people, but they've been programmed in some way, in a certain way that even they don't realize that they value certain people over other people. They don't realize this, right? But as Muslims, what we need to remember is, how can our loyalty be with these people? Of course, we live amongst people who are Muslim and non-Muslim, and we, abide by the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we don't transgress and all these things, right? We actually should be a positive influence amongst people and society. However, what we must understand is our identity is that we are Muslims, and in that respect, there's a clear line. How many more reminders do we need? And is it only because it happened in Iraq, and that's why we don't see it as an issue? If it happened in Pakistan or something like this, maybe people would feel it more. But I think that's an important point that we need to think about, is they did all of this. They killed so many people. Because of them, ISIS came about. All the chaos we saw in the Arab Spring, all of these things are linked, and no one was held accountable. No one was punished. In fact, they were rewarded. Now, as a Muslim, digest that. And that's important. So, guys, I'm not sure if there's any more comments you want to make, but I think it's probably the right time to bring the podcast to a close. As usual practice, I do ask for your final thoughts, but I think we may have expressed our final thoughts. But what I would say then is to mix things up, is maybe ask you guys to maybe just give some advice for Ramadan on maybe any thoughts you've got on how we can best maximize Ramadan. Any advice that we can incorporate in our daily practices, inshallah. Rash, I'll start with you, bro.
Yeah, so I'm going to link it to the topic, and also what I mentioned at my khutbah on Friday is that, everything we've just discussed now, there will be many Muslims that will think, during Ramadan, all of this politics, all of these issues, let's forget about them and let's just become a hermit and become like a monk and just do ibadah. And again, don't get me wrong, I mentioned this on Friday, is that if you're sinning and you move away from sin and you become a hermit, alhamdulillah, it's better than sinning. But what I would say is, don't become a hermit and a monk and just forget about the ummah and just concentrate on your ibadah in Ramadan. Ramadan is also an opportunity to do those things that are going to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that doesn't have to be limited just to your personal ibadah. If we did that, we just become individuals and we're not part of an ummah. Our ummah is in pain, and all of the things you just mentioned today, they are all issues that, people need to be aware of. And if we're not aware of them, we will never solve them. So as much as, yes, we need to make the most of Ramadan, no doubt we will be reciting Quran, we'll be going to Taraweeh, and we'll do our best to get the most out of it. But I would say to myself first is make sure that we are also in our gatherings. Remember, we'll be in gatherings more so in Ramadan than we are rest of the year. Use those gatherings as an opportunity to discuss these type of things, and only an aware ummah will be able to tackle these things. And that's like my message to myself first, and inshallah to others as well.
Jazakallah khair, bro. Very important. Very important. Ishi, anything you want to add, bro?
I think it's a slightly different point, but it's a month of mercy. Ramadan coming up, and Allah's mercy is available, so you got to make the most of it. And I think the most important thing for many Muslims is the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a dialogue, and we should treat it as Allah is telling us how to live our life. And we need to understand it and start incorporating it in our life and understand what it was revealed for. It's not there just to be read, it's there to be enacted. The first 13 years of the Prophet ﷺ's life were the Meccan surahs, and he was delivering them, and they changed these people. And they are praised even till today. And we need to connect to it in a similar way, discuss it and apply it to all these situations. Would Umar radiallahu ta'ala be in this situation? Would he allow people to rot like this? I don't think so. And this is how we need to reconnect, and we need to understand the Quran is a living thing, and we make it alive by enacting the followings. And it starts with that dialogue. Well, what is Allah saying to us? What does Allah actually want us to do with this book? It's not just to be read, oh, this, that, the other. It's to harden your personality, shape it. Once we engage it in that way, that's how we benefit.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Really good points. JK, anything to add, bro?
Yeah, I think the brothers have made some top points, to be fair. I think the only thing I'd add is, I think similar to Rash, really. I think Ramadan is an opportunity to be among people, being among the ummah. There's so many issues we're going through, whether it be physical, kind of obviously, the wars and stuff that are people in Palestine and other areas of the ummah suffering, but also the cultural attack on Islam and on our children. There's so much going on, so much that people are going through. We need to work and help each other through Islam, and look to what Ishi is saying, really, through the Quran. It's our guidance, it's our Furqan, right? It's our criterion. We need to refer back to it and recognize that this attack that is occurring against the Islam and the Ummah can only be repelled through the words of Allah and implementing the words of Allah and the guidance and methodology of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I wasn't gonna add anything because I think you guys have mentioned a lot, but something did come to mind linked to what Ishi was saying. I saw this video of a guy who I don't really agree with in many things, but he made a point and he was talking about the Quran, and he said a lot of Muslims think the Quran is about salah, fasting, Hajj and stuff like this, right? Like it mainly just say 5 pillars. And he was saying, if the Quran if Islam is just these things, he's saying, well, the Quran probably could have been a couple of pages. He was saying like, why is the Quran so long for? If Islam was only these things, then why was the rest of the Quran? I mean, if you're looking from a Mus'haf point of view, hundreds of pages, why was it revealed for? And it was quite interesting. Like, I mean, I didn't watch the full video, and like I said, I didn't agree on everything, so I'm not sure if he did a flip mode at the end, right? What he meant, but I know what he was trying to say is the fact that Islam is more than just 5 pillars. And the reason why I mention it is we say Ramadan is a month of Quran. Maybe it's a question we think about. Actually, if we just do these things, then what's in the rest of the Quran? Because surely the Salah stuff doesn't take that many pages. The stuff about Hajj isn't going to be that much. The couple of ayats about fasting is, why is there hundreds of pages? Why is there, 30 surahs? Why, if Islam was just this? And I thought I'd just add that because it's, Ramadan is the month of Quran. So guys, we'll end the podcast on that note, and inshallah ta'ala, I hope that people watching and listening will benefit from this. Like I always say, I certainly have. I always benefit from a discussion with my guests and my co-hosts, and I also pray that inshallah we make it to Ramadan, and that we can make the most of this month and really squeeze out the hasana, squeeze out the barakah from this month. And I pray that the ummah is in a better place at the end of Ramadan than it is at its beginning. So on that note, guys, Jazakallah khair for joining me, and inshallah ta'ala, I'll see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.